Welcome everybody, we're so glad you're here. Why don't y'all get up on your feet and let's sing together. I saw Satan fall like lightning. Come on, sing it out. I saw darkness run for cover, but the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. Come on, sing it out. I believe in signs and wonders. I have resurrection power. Still a miracle that I just can't get over. My name is registered in heaven. Sing my praise belongs to you forever. Come on, sing it out. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Come together, all ye children, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Sing that again. Our God will finish what He started. This is my testimony from death to life. together. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Come on, sing it out. Greater things are still to come. Oh, can you sing it louder? If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify, come on. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony.
As the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. As the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Come down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Come down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. As the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. As the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, come and do it again. Open up the gates, let heaven on in. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, come and do it again. Open up the gates, let heaven on in. Come rest on us, yeah. Rest on. Come down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Come down,
Will you be my light when I cannot see? And when I can't take another step, Lord, would you carry me? When I've lost my fight, will you be my strength? Will you set me a table in the presence of my enemies? I shall not want, I shall not want. Oh, my soul's got a shepherd in the valley, and I shall not. Come on, sing it with us. I shall not want. Lift your voice. I shall not want. 'Cause my cup's running over, and I shall not want. And I will lift my eyes to where my help comes from. No, I won't be afraid of the shadow, 'cause I've seen the sun. No, I won't stop when the way gets hard, 'cause the green only grows in the valley, and that's where you are. I shall not want, I shall not want. Oh, my soul's got a shepherd in the valley, and I shall not want. Lift your voice and sing, no matter what. I shall not want. In every season, I shall not want. 'Cause my cup's running over, and I shall not want. Got everything that I need, your goodness and your mercy. Got everything that I need, your goodness and your mercy. Make this your prayer. I got everything that I need, your goodness and your mercy. Now I got goodness and I got mercy. Hallelujah, glory, hallelujah. Can you sing it? Yeah, I got goodness. When this life is over, I'm gonna live again. I'm gonna trade this cross for a crown. No, it's not the end. When you call my name, I will take my rest. There's a mansion in glory and you're gonna meet me there. I shall not want, I shall not want. He will wipe every tear from my eyes. I shall not want. Come on, sing it with me. I shall not want, I shall not want. I'll be home in His presence forever. I shall not want. Oh, for the Lord is my shepherd in a valley. For the Lord is my shepherd when I'm lacking. For the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want.
Amen. You all can go ahead and take a seat. We are so glad that you are here with us today, whether you're joining us in person or you're watching online. Thank you so much for being here. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I personally, when we get to sing together, that's my favorite part of the whole week, because I love that these songs are a reminder to us that God is continuing to do His good work in us wherever we're at in our lives. And I know you probably hear us talk about stuff like that here every weekend, the freedom and the restoration that we can experience because of Jesus. But we talk about it every weekend because it's absolutely true. Through Jesus, we can experience this renewed sense of joy and hope and peace in our lives that we really can't get anywhere else. But even with that truth, I also want to acknowledge that life is really messy, and sometimes it's really difficult. We might go through seasons that are really tough, and it might be really hard to experience or feel that joy or that hope or that peace. And that doesn't make you crazy, doesn't make you weird. You're human. And I just want to acknowledge that maybe if you walked in here today feeling like that, it's okay. And the cool thing, though, about being a part of a church family is that you don't have to feel like that all by yourself. Because family does not leave family out to dry. And we want to support you and come alongside you, which is why we actually have a counseling center right here on our campus. I don't know if you knew that, but it's actually, there's an entrance right behind the auditorium here. And we have an incredible staff of amazing counselors that just want to support you and help you and just walk with you through whatever season of life you might be in. And in addition to one-on-one or individual counseling, we also have a variety of different support groups, 3 of which are actually starting this next month in September. So maybe if you're kind of resonating with or in a weird, difficult season in your life, I just want to encourage you to check out their webpage. It's fcchb.com/counseling. Not forcing you or telling you that you have to sign up for anything, but I just want to encourage you to check out that page just to see what resources and opportunities are available to you, because we truly want you to experience the fullness of life that Jesus has to offer. And if this can be a stepping stone on the way to get you there, then by all means, we want you to be able to take advantage of it. But again, wherever you are at this morning, we are just very, very glad that you are here with us. And right now we're going to jump into week 6 of our Parables series.
Well, hey, good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? We good? All right. Hey, if you're tuning in online, thanks so much for being here. We are so grateful to spend this time with you. You know, today we are continuing in our series, Parables, which has been our summer series. And each week we're taking a look at a different story that Jesus told. And we talked about how parables are these short stories that are often a combination of metaphor, of simile. They use common images that people in Jesus' culture would have understood. But the parables oftentimes have unexpected outcomes that challenge the ways that we understand God and ourselves. And today we're going to look at a story that's found in Luke chapter 14 that's called the Parable of the Great Banquet. And Jesus happens to tell this story while he's at a dinner party. But before we jump into the story, we're going to back up a little bit in order to really hear the fullness of the story and talk about the eating habits of Jesus. Now that might sound like a really strange thing, but when we look at the life of Jesus, one of the things that we notice is that there's all these details that we get when we read the New Testament. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels that talk about the life of Jesus, we see these little details that we get about his life, about what he did, how he spent his time. Jesus was someone that traveled around a lot. Jesus spent time teaching people and healing people. Jesus spent time with his closest followers. But one of the details that we get about Jesus' life is that he also spent a lot of time eating with people. He was constantly going over to people's homes for meals, whether they invited him or whether he invited himself over. And just over and over again, we just see these moments, these scenes where he just shared a table with people. And it seems like Jesus understood something powerful about sharing meals and even about festivals and really even the importance of just having a party every now and again. I think we can say, honestly, that Jesus loved to have those kind of good times with people. Now, show of hands this morning, how many of you love those kind of get-togethers? You love parties, you love planning maybe the parties and hosting. Okay, maybe some of us just love whenever there's free food. That's always a good time. You know, I'm more introverted, honestly, and so like big crowds, it's not really my thing, but I love when there's like a good party, whether it's like a holiday party or a wedding or just even a backyard barbecue, and you can get together with family, friends, and there's good food and good conversation and laughter, and maybe even some music. Those are some of the best times in life. Those are just reminders of the importance of celebrating just really the fullness of life. I think Jesus understood that. He understood that those times where we gather, where we celebrate, that shares something about God's heart and what God's kingdom is really like. So Jesus does this all the time. He goes to people's homes, he has these meals, he hangs out. But there's these accusations that get leveled upon Jesus because he does this consistently. In fact, he gets called a glutton and a drunkard because he's sharing a table with people, because he's eating with them. But more than that, he has criticism that comes to him because of the people that he shares a table with. Mark gives us this insight in Mark chapter 2, and he tells us this. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law who were Pharisees saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Now, we might ask the question, why do they ask this about Jesus? Why do they care about the people that Jesus shares a meal with? And the answer to that is because in the ancient world, in the world that Jesus lived in, there were all sorts of rules and regulations about eating. There were certain things that you ate and certain things that you didn't. There are certain ways you prepared it and certain ways that made it clean or unclean. But there were also all sorts of rules about the type of people that you would share a table with. And Jesus, as this rabbi, as a Jewish man, there were many people that would have been deemed inappropriate for him to have a meal with. But the table of Jesus was an open table. And he constantly invited people to sit at that table. But this wasn't just something that Jesus was doing that was out of the norm, like, you know, Jesus has just some different ways of doing things. It actually carried a message with it. There's a man named Walter Brueggemann who's a professor, Old Testament scholar, writer. He wrote a book called The Prophetic Imagination. He talked about just the prophetic tradition in Israel, and he attached that to Jesus and said a lot of what Jesus was doing carried on kind of that spirit of what the prophets did. And when Jesus would sit down and eat with people in his culture, he was sending a message. And what Jesus was actually doing was he was dismantling some of the power structures that existed in his culture that separated people. And the message that Jesus was sharing again and again is that some of these divisions that existed, some of the divisions that said these people are close to God and these people are far from God, he did away with those. as he showed that God's mercy was as just for those people who were thought to be wrong as the people who were thought to be in the right. This act of Jesus was a revolution as he pushed back on thoughts about God and what God's kingdom was really like. But the story that we're going to look at today in Luke 14, Jesus is not having dinner at the house of someone who would have been thought of to be a sinner or unrighteous or someone that normally wouldn't be welcomed at someone's table. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Jesus is having dinner at the house of someone who would have been thought of as holy, as righteous, of having everything together. And it's at this story, it's at this party that Jesus shares a pretty shocking story that challenges those who are present in their understanding of God and his kingdom. Now, Luke 14 is kind of a long chapter, and so we're going to briefly go through some parts that get to this story that Jesus tells, but it begins in verse 1 with a little context as to what's happening at this dinner party. And Luke tells us this: one Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. Now, this one verse just sets up the context for this whole chapter, and there's a lot of details that we get in just this little scene. It begins by telling us this is happening on the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath was this special day of rest that God gave to his people, and it was part of their weekly rhythm to have this day where they would just be able to cease work and just really enjoy God's presence. And there's a lot that we could say about that, and you can kind of trace the origins of the Sabbath in the Old Testament, but it was a gift that God gave his people, and it's connected to this incredible story in the book of Exodus where God's people were slaves, and then God gave them this gift saying your worth isn't in doing, it's in being. So the Sabbath was this beautiful thing. It was part of Jewish life. But Jesus has endured some controversy when it comes to Sabbath because he's pushed back on some of the regulations and some of the rules that have developed that were more legalistic than simply enjoying what it was. And so there's already some tension when it comes to Jesus and his understanding of the Sabbath and how he's taught it and how he and his followers observe it. Now add to that, Luke tells us that Jesus is at this party and he's being carefully watched. Now, I don't know about you, but when I go to like a dinner party, I don't want to go because I'm being carefully watched, right? I mean, Jesus is kind of like, almost like there's tension in this meal. Like they're trying to see if he's going to say something, if he's going to trip up, if they can catch him in something. So there's some tension in this meal. I think we can all relate to that in some way. We've probably had meals like that before where there's just like a little tension. Maybe it was like a family thing and you had to talk about an issue that maybe was uncomfortable. It was after a fight with someone, or maybe it was like a work situation and it was like more of a serious meal. And so you're kind of sitting there and you're trying to enjoy this meal, but there's also just that little bit of awkwardness. Like, do we make eye contact? Do we talk? Do we just eat? What are we doing? So there's some tension in this meal. And all of this is happening at the house of a prominent Pharisee, somebody who's well-to-do, somebody who had influence and power and clout. All that's happening here. Now, some commentators, they see Luke 14 and this banquet that Jesus is a part of as being something known as a symposium, which was something in the ancient world where you would have a meal and you would gather great thinkers and minds together to debate certain issues. It was kind of like dinner and entertainment. For some of us, maybe that sounds really exciting and we'd love that. For others of us, that sounds like a nightmare. So Jesus is a part of kind of this gathering, a lot of important people. And what Jesus does is he engages with the people at this party. And he engages with his host and begins to have some conversations. Now, the first thing that Jesus does is he heals a man, which is something Jesus has done before on the Sabbath. One of the guests has this physical ailment. He has a swelling of the body. And so Jesus heals him. And he kind of asks his audience, like, do you think this is okay? And he just kind of waits for their response, and they don't say anything. And then what Jesus does next is he tells this short story, a first parable that he tells in Luke 14. And as Jesus is sitting there at this table, he notices that people are trying to find the best seats. And they're jockeying for that position of where they want to sit and in that special place by the host, kind of the center of the table. So Jesus tells this short story about humility and says, hey, when you go to a party, when you go to a wedding banquet, you should actually seek to sit in a place that isn't one of those best seats. You should humble yourself. Because if you do that, your host might actually see you and they'll ask you to move up and they'll honor you in that way. But if you just assume that you are important, that you have this rightful position, you're going to be embarrassed when your host asks you to move down and sit somewhere else. So he says something about humility and how we view ourselves. And then what Jesus does next is he turns to his host. And he starts to notice the people that are sitting down at this table who are coming to this party. And he notices that all the people that are arriving are really people that are just like this host. And so Jesus says to his host, he said, you should have invited people that could never pay you back. Because you've invited people who are like you, your family, your friends, your rich neighbors, and what they're gonna do is they're gonna invite you to the next party that they have. Like you invited them to this party, so they're gonna invite you to the next party. But what you should have done is invited people that could have never repaid you. Then you would really be rewarded by God. So far in this dinner party, Jesus has not said anything that really would have made the people at that party excited. He's actually criticized. He's given some interesting things to think about. He's talked about humility. He's talked about the people who are showing up at this party. And then what happens next is one of the guests at this party, he makes a comment to Jesus. And this comment that he makes to Jesus is what prompts the story that Jesus tells. So we read this in verse 15. When one of those at the table heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." So again, Jesus talked about humility, talked about the people that are being invited to this party, and the response is those who are really blessed. The one who is really blessed is the one who will enjoy a feast in the kingdom of God. Now, this unnamed character in the story, he's referencing this belief that we find in Judaism about how God sets the world right at the end of time. And there's this vision, this image that we see in the Old Testament in several places, but especially in the words of the prophets that describe how God's going to bring about renewal and restoration for his people. And it's described as this feast, as this great banquet that happens, that God basically throws this big party when he brings about this redemption for his people. Sometimes it was called the heavenly banquet or the messianic banquet. And again, it's this image that we find in a couple different parts of the Old Testament. But one of the famous passages that talked about this incredible thing God was going to do happens in Isaiah 25. Now, Isaiah is a prophet in the Old Testament, and Isaiah writes these words in Isaiah 25 to describe this great banquet. And he says this, "On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats, and the finest of wines. On this mountain, he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. The Lord has spoken." Now, Isaiah, he writes really this beautiful description of this banquet, that God is going to bring about just this incredible meal. He's going to unite his people, and what he's going to do is he's going to wipe the tears from their faces. He's going to remove the shroud that covers them, which was the burial shroud, as he swallows up death forever. Now, Isaiah writes this incredible description during a difficult time in Israel's history. The northern kingdom had been exiled. The southern kingdom, they were heading towards that. And Isaiah writes about this future hope of what God is up to, what God is going to do. He's not forgotten about you. But it's interesting because there was this discussion during the time of Jesus about this great banquet and who actually got an invite. Isaiah talks about all peoples being able to participate, that God is doing this incredible thing. But the debate became, does it really mean all peoples? Is that really what God is saying, or does he mean certain people, righteous people, people who were good enough? What actually was Isaiah saying? So in this dinner party, this man hears Jesus talk about this dinner that they're having, this banquet, and he says, what really matters, Jesus, is who gets an invite to this great banquet. And undoubtedly, this man and the people who were gathered at that table thought, yeah, that's us. That's exactly who Isaiah's talking about. Now, Jesus doesn't respond to this man and say, you're wrong, or he doesn't say, well, that's one way to think about it. Instead, the very next thing that Jesus does is he tells a story, the parable of the great banquet. So Jesus begins and he says this, Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet, and he invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses." He continues, "The first said, 'I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' And still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.'" So in this story, Jesus says there's a man, he's throwing a big party, he's throwing a big banquet. And he sends his servant out to collect all the RSVPs, which was just kind of a tradition. Like you sent out the invitations, then you went out and told people, hey, the party's starting. It's time to show up now, come and be a part of it. So this man goes out and does that, but everyone begins to make these excuses as to why they can't come to the party. And these excuses, they all highlight wrong priorities, which is a theme in Jesus' teaching. When he talks about being a follower of his, being a part of his kingdom, he always talks about priorities being in the right place. So all these responses are priorities that are a little misaligned. The first one says, hey, I just bought some property. I got a field. I got to go check it out. I got to make sure it's okay. Next one says, I just got some oxen. I'm going to go do some lawn care. So just let me go see if that's good. And the third one says, hey, I just got married. I have this other commitment. It's more important. I can't come to the party. Now, what's interesting is all these excuses are not really valid excuses because it wasn't a practice to buy a field unless you'd already seen it. So to go see about a field, you'd have already done that. To buy oxen and say you have to try them out, again, you probably wouldn't have done that. You already would have seen that they work and that they were good. And even being married wasn't a valid excuse because of just how that would have been planned and the timing of that versus this party. But all these excuses come in, and then Jesus continues the story. But the shocking thing in the story isn't just that people made excuses as to the party and why they couldn't attend. The shocking part of the story is what happens next. Now, one of the things about the parables that we talked about in this series is that parables often have these unexpected outcomes. And parables are said to have end stress because the true emphasis of the story happens at the end. And what's shocking about this story is that even though all these guests can't make it to the party still goes on. And that's kind of strange. Because if we were throwing a party and we were planning this big get-together and we invited a lot of people to come, we invited our friends and our family, and then everyone started making excuses or they said, hey, I can't make that date, we're busy. And if we had enough people say, we can't make it to the party, we'd probably think, well, we got to plan the party again. We got to change the date because all of our guests can't make it, and we're just going to have a party with like that one random cousin that we kind of like, but we're not really sure if we just want to have a party with that one person. But in this story, even though the guest list changes, the party continues. So Jesus continues with the story, and he says, the servant came back, and he reported to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry, and he ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, and the blind, and the lame. Sir, the servant said, what you ordered has been done, but there is still room. Then the master told his servant, go out to the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house may be full. I tell you, not one of those who are invited will get a taste of my banquet. Now, Jesus in this story here, he's speaking this word of truth. It's kind of honest. It's kind of harsh. And he's saying something to the people that are gathered at this table about who gets invited to this banquet, who gets to experience it. Because maybe it's not the people who just think they are in who get to participate. Now, this man who makes this comment to Jesus, he's talking to Jesus about the future. He's saying what really matters, Jesus, is the future. What really matters is when we get to participate in God's kingdom at the end of time. That's truly where our focus is. But what Jesus was saying and how Jesus lived, and really one of the biggest messages of Jesus' life is that God's kingdom wasn't just a future affair. God's kingdom was present now. God's kingdom was present in Jesus, and it looks like this great banquet where all people are invited to come in, where healing happens, where people who are far from God are shown that God is for them. Jesus was offering another way to think about this kingdom and this reality. And it's like a party where invitations are sent out and more people will show up than you could have ever thought. That God's heart was that big, that God's love was that good. The party is for everyone. A few years ago, I was on a global trip in the country of Ecuador. I've been to Ecuador a few times, and it's really this incredible place. I love the people. They are so loving and hospitable. And on this trip, we were building this extension to the church, and we had done a lot of construction. And then we found out that one of our team members was having a birthday. It was her birthday that day. And so I talked to our host, Giovanni, and he said, hey, we got to celebrate. It's a birthday. We got to have a party. So we went out to the store, and we started buying, all sorts of decorations. We bought a cake and some food, and we started decorating the church. And then we invited the church to come and the community to be a part of this great party. And then there was one final item that we needed to get to really make this a great birthday party. and that was a piñata. So we went out and we got this piñata. Now, I went back to the church, and I'm trying to find a place where we're going to hang up the piñata with the rope, and I'm trying to find the bat or the stick so they can break it open. And I was told, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it differently. So they had the birthday girl stand in a chair. Her name was Sarah, and she's holding this piñata. And I noticed that all of a sudden there was like this big crowd that was gathering around her. And I'm trying to like stay towards the back, because there's kids and students and adults, but everyone's kind of crowding around her. So they count her down, and she rips open the piñata. The candy goes everywhere. And then what happened next was the biggest dog pile I've ever seen. It was phenomenal. Everyone is diving in. Again, I'm trying to stay towards the back. I get pushed, and I'm just like flying in the air. And there's kids and students, adults are all just grabbing candy and laughing and celebrating. It was just really this amazing moment. And I remember asking the host, Giovanni, afterwards, I'm like, well, why did we do it that way? And I loved his answer. And he said, well, it's because the party isn't just for her. It's for everyone. Everyone gets invited to participate. Everyone gets to celebrate. And I remember hearing that, and I thought, that's exactly what Jesus is saying about God's kingdom. He's describing it as a feast, as a banquet, as a party where everyone is invited to come in and experience it. The party is for everyone. See, I love these words that Jesus says towards the end of this story. When the servant comes back to the master and says, hey, I've gone out, I've done what you've asked me to do, but there's still room. There's still room in your party for more people. And then he tells them, go out to the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. Go out even farther. There's more people that need to hear about this party, and they've been invited to it. And this word that's used here, compel. Now, we hear that word and we might think that it means to force or to coerce, but that's not what Jesus is saying. This word compel actually means insist. Insist that people would know that they're welcome. Insist that whatever barriers they might have in their lives, whatever feelings of not being worthy, they'd overcome that because there's an open seat at the banquets. Because the party's not full, there's still room. Jesus talks about God's kingdom as a party, as a banquet, where all are invited to come in and participate. And what makes this party work, what makes this party include all of us, that propels us forward, is grace. I mean, that's really the heart of the kingdom message, is grace, is God's grace for us, the grace that we need to have for each other. What gets us an invite to the party is this gift of grace. The word grace means undeserved kindness. It means favor. It's a gift. Paul writes in Ephesians 2 that it's by grace that we've been saved. By grace. It's not by works. It's not by earning our place in the kingdom. It's a gift. The moment you have to earn something, it ceases to be a gift. Then it becomes a wage. Paul talks about in Romans that the wages of sin is death. The wage of sin equals death. That's what we get for sin. But the gift of Jesus, the gift of God's grace, is eternal life. When we celebrate people on their birthdays and we give them gifts, we don't really expect them to return that favor to us, right? That's kind of a selfish way to view about it. I give you a gift, now you give me a gift. They didn't earn anything. We give them a gift to celebrate them, expecting nothing in return. God's grace to us is not because of what we've done, but because of who he is. And God invites us into a kingdom that's founded on grace, on his gift, on his love for us. See, Jesus lived in a culture that had created all sorts of boundaries for people. They made up rules about who was included, who was invited, who was clean, who was unclean, who was holy, who was righteous, who was blessed by God, who was cursed by God. And Jesus, again and again in his life, said those categories are wrong. There's a heavenly Father who has grace, who has love, who has done what no one could do to save us, to invite us in, to have us experience forgiveness, to have us experience grace. And Jesus sat down at tables where he demonstrated this heart of God, that you're welcome to, that you have a place to, that God is for you too. And when we think about the church is a community of grace, where we come together because we know we all need grace. We all are here because of grace, and we can share in that with each other. We live in a world that's really different than the one that Jesus lived in. I think we all can recognize that first century Israel, Palestine is very different than 2021 and the world we live in. And yet, aren't there certain things that are the same? There's still division. There's still social hierarchies. There's still rules that are in place. There's still people that are invited and welcomed and people who oftentimes don't feel that they have that invite. In a lot of ways, we live in a world that's about power and influence. It's about competition. It's about outdoing each other. It's about earning your place. And I get that. I struggle with that a bit because I am kind of a competitive person. I can admit that. I'm 36 years old, and I have to remind myself sometimes, Stephen, a pickup basketball game is just a pickup basketball game. It doesn't really matter. Although now being 36 and out of shape and out of my prime, the Lakers might want me. So I'm excited about that. We'll see. Seems to be what they're doing. I'm not saying competition is always a bad thing. There isn't good things that come from it. But God's kingdom isn't one that's built on competition. It's built on grace. It's built on what he has done for us, not how we compare or how we earn it. Jesus sat at this table with all of these people that thought they earned that place at the banquet, that thought that they were the ones who were in. And the truth he was trying to say is no one earns it because none of us are good enough. It's by God's incredible love that we get a seat at that table. See, there's this image in the story that Jesus comes back to again and again. And there's a reason why Jesus told this story when he was at a dinner party, while he was sitting at a table. And that's the image of just what it means to share a meal with someone. There's a reason why Jesus did that so often in his life. Jesus knew that the table creates society in the same way that it can divide a society. Jesus understood that the table can be a place that heals people, that invites people in, that shares that we have something in common. That was the message that he gave again and again, to come in, to experience that, to know that God was for that person. So this story, really what it does, I think, is it challenges our thinking of God. Our challenges our understanding of how good God is, of how much God does love us. And one of the things that often happens when we read the Bible, and I think this is especially true when we read parables, is we read through them and we kind of look for that application. Oftentimes, like, okay, I've read this story, God, what is it that you want me to do right now? And sometimes there's a really clear application, like, okay, do this, do X, Y, and Z. But oftentimes, and especially with the parables, that's not always so clear. Because oftentimes the invitation is for us to really think about things differently, to view things from the perspective of Jesus, his worldview, how he understood God, how he understood his life. And in this story, I think Jesus is constantly kind of bringing us back to this image of the table, to this image of relationships, to this image of who we include and invite in our lives. And maybe the first thing that we can think of when we hear this story is just to spend a moment thinking about God's table, God's relational heart for people. And the fact that maybe God's table, that maybe God's family is so much bigger than we ever imagined. And he is inviting people in. He's inviting people to come and find a seat at that table. And maybe for some of us, we hear this story and we kind of think, well, that's all good, but maybe we feel like we're like those people who got invited, but we have excuses. We have other things that are more important, more pressing, that kind of keep us from accepting that invitation. Or maybe for some of us, we just think, yeah, but not me, God. You've invited people, but maybe not me. And we feel as if God couldn't possibly want us to have a seat at that table. There's this phrase that I've heard people share before to me, where they say, I just feel like in God's eyes, I'm a lost cause. It always breaks my heart. Because there's no such thing as a lost cause in God's eyes. And we may be lost at times. I know in my life there's been seasons where I've been lost. But you're never a lost cause to God. For some of us, maybe we just need to hear this truth that God is for you, that God's love is so much bigger than we could have imagined. You're his kid. You're his son. You're his daughter. And his kingdom is for you. There's a place for you. I love what Paul writes in the book of Romans 5:8, one of my favorite verses. He says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we are still sinners, Christ died for us. The word demonstrates means proves. God proves his love for us. Before we even knew it, before we even acknowledged it, He had a plan for our forgiveness, for our salvation in Jesus. So as we think about God's table, maybe we just need to reflect on what God is really like, his nature, his love, and the invitation that he sent us. And perhaps the other image that Jesus wants us to take with us is just thinking about our own tables, my table, your table, the tables we sit at. And maybe as we look at who we invite in our lives, who we're in relationships with, maybe like that Pharisee in the story, we realize there's a lot of people who sit at my table who kind of look like me, think like me, act like me, and it's limited. And Jesus constantly sat at tables that were divided. It was all about the who's who and who could be there and who couldn't. But the tables that Jesus created were inclusive. They didn't have those categories. So maybe the invitation is more conversations, more connection, more outside of maybe what the norm is. Because the table that God has for his family is one that's big and inclusive. So much more than we could ever imagine. The story invites us to think through the nature of God's kingdom, the nature of his grace, and the forgiveness that's available. You know, there's this man named Klein Snodgrass, which I think is the best last name I've ever heard. Snodgrass, just incredible. He wrote a book called Stories with Intent. He talked about the parables. And I loved how he summarized Luke 14. I just want to close with his statements. And he says this, describing this parable. He says, Jesus eating with toll collectors and sinners is a demonstration of the presence of the kingdom in his ministry and the forgiveness available to those who respond. It's all about forgiveness, God's heart for people. They can come and be forgiven. They can come and have a seat at the table. Then he goes on and says, the point of these texts and the parable of the banquet can be summarized with a statement and a question. God is giving a party. Are you going to come? God is giving a party. It's the banquet. It's the feast. It's not a future thing. It's right now. God's presence, his kingdom, his rule and reign is present. And the church, we're celebrating in that party. The reason we gather is to celebrate how God is working in our lives, how he's working in our community during the week. We come on Sundays to celebrate that, to enjoy the party, to invite others to be a part of it. Do our lives show this incredible love and grace that God has? Are we allowing that to be what guides us and leads us? Because God is giving a party. And the question is, are we going to join in? And are we going to help others join in as well?
Let's all stand and sing together. Come now, as you are or as you want to be. Are you ready? Are you ready? Come now, tired, broken, scared, and just in need. Ready or not, it's alright. Take your time, if nothing else, just come. Are you ready? Come Are you ready? Are you ready? So come now, bringing praise for what he's gonna do next. Ready or not? Are you ready or not? Just come.
God extends his invitation to all of us, and all we have to do is just lean in and accept his grace. So maybe if today you'd like to take a step toward Jesus, even for the first time, I want to encourage you and invite you to text your name to this number, 714-623-7323. Text your name to that phone number. One of our staff members will call you within the next couple of days and just help walk you through what that looks like to take a step toward Jesus wherever you may be at in your life. And I promise you, it'll be the best decision you'll ever make. But on your way out today, if you would like to take communion or spend a little bit of time in prayer, we have all of that set up over on the other end of our campus in our chapel. Also, if you would like to partner with us through giving today, you can do that by going to our website or by downloading our FCC HB app. Also, there's some black boxes on your way out if you would like to give physically as well. But thank you so much for being here today. We love you all. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and we will see you next week.